Hello everyone and welcome to another Old World update. We have some news today regarding the combat phase. Some things that are new, some things that have stayed the same. Basically what you'd expect from these Warhammer the Old World rules, releases, rules, sneak peeks by now. You may have noticed that last weekend we also had the Warhammer World Championships, during which they released this Tomb King's miniature, this Tomb King's bone dragon. If it was going to be a whole range for the Tomb Kings like they did for Bretonia earlier a few months ago, then I would probably have spent an entire video on it. But for now, if you want to hear my thoughts on this particular model, I invite you to listen to the podcast. I'm going to mention it on the next episode that will be out later this week if all goes well. Let's take a look at the article, shall we? Here we have it, Warhammer the Old World Almanac, fight the good fight in the combat phase. We open with this lovely 6th edition box art cover, the starter box, 6th edition starter box cover. Empire versus Orcs. So, yeah, what are we going to do in the combat phase? We're going to sling swords and shoulder pikes. I always thought that shouldering pikes meant that you put them away and that you put them on your shoulder for marching, but apparently shouldering pikes is something that you do for fighting. So you may not be surprised by this point to discover that the fourth and final phase is divided into 4 simple steps, which again sounds a bit like a stretch because the first one is choose and fight, which definitely counts as 2 in my opinion, but well, choose is not really a thing. Calculate combat results, then the break test, and then pursuit. As with the shooting phase, these steps are followed in order for each separate combat. It's too complicated to summarize in full here, ha, try me. But this article should give you a flavor of how it all works. You begin the phase by choosing which combat you want to begin first. That's usually the case how it's done. Doesn't really specify this, but the player whose turn it is can decide which combat is handled first. That's usually the way it's done. It used to be the way it's done in the earlier editions, so I'm assuming that this will be the case here as well. Fighting happens in ranks and only the first rank of an engaged unit can fight. There's a little asterisk here that goes down all the way down to the page saying, let's see, where is it? This is referred to as the fighting rank, and then certain units have the ability to fight in deeper ranks or offer supplementary attacks. But we won't get any special rules for that in this article. So here we go. We start with the combat we want to begin first, and then some models may make supporting attacks from a deeper rank. Multiple units can be engaged in the same combat. Any model that is able to fight without being in base contact may only make 1 attack this turn. So if you have a second rank of ogres with 3 attacks each, they still can make only 1 supporting attack, assuming that ogres can do something like that. Then we get this lovely 6th edition Night Goblin box art. You may recognize this Night Goblin as he is also the one that featured prominently on the 6th edition Ravening Hordes booklet. It was the same piece of artwork that was used. Once you worked out who can fight, it's time to determine the initiative for each model and see who strikes first. So we are not going to strike in charge order, but the model with the highest initiative strikes first, and so down the order. You do get a bonus for charging and a bigger one for hitting them in the flank or rear. Now, there's a bit of speculation here, or at least some room for speculation, because it doesn't specify how big this bonus is. Is it just going to be +1 initiative for charging or +2 initiative for charging? Will you be getting +1 or +2 initiative for in the flank or the rear? Will it stack? If you charge someone in the flank, will it be +3 or +4 even maybe? We don't know yet. Might even be something that there can be maybe a double initiative for charging, the charge bonus. So yeah, we don't know. They don't tell us what that is going to be. They say, however, this could still be a situation in which a lumbering foe like a stone troll with initiative 1 may find himself striking second on the charge against the preternatural senses of his swordmaster with initiative 6. Then we get to the weapon skill chart. Yes, weapon skill is back, the to-hit chart is back, although it's not quite back. Because it used to be that there were no 2 pluses on the to-hit chart. It would end with a 3 plus and a 1 and a 2 would always miss. The formula is still the same. If you have the same or higher, you hit on a 4 plus. If the opponent's weapon skill is more than double that of the defender, you hit on a 5 plus. So for example, weapon skill 2 against 2 is a 4 plus, 2 against 3, 2 against 4 is all a 4 plus, and then 2 against 5 is a 5 plus. If you hit at something that's lower with a higher weapon skill that's against something with a lower weapon skill, you hit on a 3 plus. So for example, 6 against 5 is a 3 plus. But if you go below half, that suddenly is a 2 plus. So 6 against 3 is still a 3 plus, but 6 against 2 is a 2 plus. That would mean that it's going to be far easier for characters with high weapon skill to hit against units. So if you have your, let's say, Black Orc Warboss with a weapon skill of 7 hit against a unit of puny humans, then his 4 attacks, probably only 1 at most will miss if you account for the probability. Whereas in the old rules, usually you could count on at least 1 missing. And by the way, I roll my dice, that would usually be 2 or 3 misses. You roll as many dice as your engaged models have attacks, that's still going to be the same. With high initiative models striking first, a charging unit has the opportunity to overwhelm its enemies before they have the wit to swing back. That's an important bit, because in 8th edition you would fight regardless. So if in 8th edition you would charge and you would kill the entire first rank, then the second rank would not be able to, would still be able to fight back. So all the models you killed would still fight. In earlier editions, it would be that all the models you took out are now unable to fight back. So this will mean that initiative becomes a lot more important then. Then you roll to wound and you make your armor saves as normal. We've seen how that works in the previous article on shooting. Casualties are removed from the back ranks, that's still the same. The rear ranks stepping forward as their comrades bite the dirt. Every death in each unit is set aside, and then you will need them to calculate combat results. You get +1 combat result for each unsaved wound inflicted. You get +1 rank bonus. It doesn't say here that you get a maximum of 3. Might still be the case, but since we do only get wider than deep units usually in combat, I'm assuming that the cap won't be that big of a problem anymore. +1 point for standard, +1 for a battle standard, +1 for a flank attack, +2 for a rear attack. That's all still the same as it has been in basically every edition since maybe even second. You get +1 point for high ground. That was something that was in there and then it got lost again. It was a thing in 6th edition and it wasn't in 8th, I believe. You don't get a +1 on the charge, which was a thing in 8th edition and also in some early editions. Overkill, which I assume still refers to a challenge, +1 point per excess wound. Other bonuses as applicable. I'm guessing that's things like maybe a war banner or a battle banner that gives you extra combat results. Add up all the points and see who's won, and now we get to take a break test. And there's a little bit of a difference here because now you have no longer 2 but 3 possibilities. You have to compare the results to 2 numbers. If the result you roll is higher than your natural leadership, you break and flee. That's still the same. If your result is less than your leadership, but still more than your leadership minus the number of points that you lost combat by, you fall back in good order. And if the amount of combat, the dice roll is 2 snake eyes, or if it is less than the modified roll, then you give ground. Now, apart from breaking and fleeing, the article doesn't really explain what these things do. But we can get a bit of a suggestion, a bit of a hint from what's been mentioned here in this article and what's been mentioned in earlier articles as well. Giving ground probably means that you step backwards a little bit, or maybe both units move apart, and that's the end of combat. Because one of the things we get is if you win combat, you can follow up unit that gave ground. You can re-enter combat a few inches forward. So I'm assuming that if they give ground, maybe even fall back, if they give ground, they move back 2 inches, probably, or maybe D3 inches, something like that. And the other unit can follow up if they want to in their combat results, in their response section, response phase. Fallback in good order will probably mean something like you go out of combat, but you are not breaking and fleeing. You retreat from combat, but in such a way that you are still able to fight next turn without taking a rally test. And break and flee will mean that you run away and that you need a rally test to return to a fighting formation. So here are the things you can do when you win combat. You can restrain, which means you have to pass a leadership test to avoid pursuit. You can follow up, which is if a unit gave ground, you can re-enter combat a few inches forward. And you can pursue if a unit flees or falls back. If you catch a fleeing unit, it's cut down and destroyed. If you catch a unit falling back, combat begins again and the pursuer counts as having charged. Now, we don't really know yet how far this follow-up pursue roll is going to be, if there's going to be a random or a fixed move. They do say with overrun, in the case a victor has completely killed its target, it may make one full move directly forward. So if you have a cavalry unit with a movement of 8, that's going to be 8 inches. It's not going to be 3d6 or 2d6, 3d6 due to highest, something like that. So it might be that pursuit is going to be a fixed value, just the movement rate that the unit has. It might also be that there's still going to be some dice rolling involved, and the same goes with both falling back and break and flee. Might be that since pursue is the option that you can do if a unit flees or falls back, that both falling back and breaking and fleeing means you run away a random number of inches. We'll just have to wait and see how that will work out. I feel that they left a lot more to the imagination in this article than they did in previous articles. One of the other things we can do in the combat phase is that we have assailment spells from wizards. We get 2 examples here, one from battle magic, one from dark magic. Hammerhand from battle magic, it's a cast value of 7+, it can go into combat, and a single enemy unit that the caster is engaged in combat with suffers 2d3 strength for hits with an armor penetration of -2. Pretty decent spell. Might also be even more decent if this will mean that the models directly opposite the wizard will not be able to strike him back. This is something that if your wizard gets into combat, that can save him there. Soul Eater, a dark magic spell, also 7+ assailment, range combat. A single enemy model the caster is engaged in combat with suffers a single strength 3 hits with multiple wounds 3, so that's a character killer. Special rule 3, multiple wounds 3 and no armor save permitted. We don't really get much more information than this, except that next week we're going to get into morale and psychology, fear, terror, hatred, and all the good stuff. So, when we take a look at these rules. A few thoughts. Some of the things that I haven't yet mentioned is that how is it going to work with these spells? It used to be that all of the spells were cast in a single phase, and if all of the spells are in a single phase, then if a wizard breaks concentration or if you run out of power dice, you don't have any more spells to cast. Do you have a certain number of spells that you can cast each turn and you have to keep track and divide them? Can you cast, say, all of your spells in the phases? If you have spells, can you cast only one spell per wizard per phase? That's something that has got my mind reeling that we don't have clarified yet. I'm curious to see how they will handle that because that can make magic either very overpowered or very underpowered. Yeah, let's see some more artwork here that I skipped over. This one I think might be from the Beast of Chaos book in 6th edition. I'm not really sure, but I do feel that I saw that one before. I think it's in the Beastman book, 6th edition Beastman. And this one here is probably in the 6th edition Bretonia book, but I can't really remember seeing this piece of artwork. So I don't really know where they got this from. Right, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video if you like the video. You can subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. This is also a good time for me to mention the Forces of Fantasy Patreon. The Forces of Fantasy Patreon is non-tiered. You can join for as little or as much as you like. And on the Forces of Fantasy Patreon, you'll find exclusive previews and Patreon-only stuff, episodes, podcasts, battle reports, stuff like that. If you want to know more about the Forces of Fantasy, you can reach me via all of these channels, forcesoffantasy@gmail.com, for any tips, advice, and feedback. Leave a comment in the section below the video, and I will also try to get back to you. And of course, you can find the Forces of Fantasy podcast on all of your regular podcast hosting platforms. I'm assuming that we will get another article next week, the one about morale and psychology. And if that's the case, I will of course be doing another video report on that. For now, I would like to thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you again next time.